The biggest lie in the luxury watch industry is the price tag. It doesn't reflect what you actually get when you pay it. From Hublot charging $16,000 for a basic, outsourced movement, to Panerai lacing their invoices with expensive navy mythology that evaporates at resale, the luxury tier is packed with hidden markups. Today, we are doing a comprehensive valuation of 22 watch brands to separate true horology from corporate illusion. Before you step up to a jewelry counter and overpay, let's look at what's actually under the hood. 22. Oris. Oris builds its own movement, start to finish, and almost nobody talks about it. The Caliber 400 comes with a 10-year warranty and resists magnetism up to 2,250 Gauss, the kind of spec sheet that usually arrives with a much bigger price tag attached. Oris stayed independent, while nearly every other mid-tier Swiss house got folded into a conglomerate over the past few decades, so the pricing never had a marketing department leaning on it, whispering that the number could be higher. That independence is the company's whole personality. It doesn't chase red carpets. It just keeps making watches the same way it has, since 1904, when two watchmakers named Paul Caton and Georges Christian bought a shuttered factory in a small Swiss village and named the company after a nearby brook. Then you check the actual number, and nothing dramatic happens. Entry mechanical pieces sit around $2,000. The in-house caliber models land between $2,200 and $2,800, roughly what competitors charge for a movement they didn't even build themselves. A diver I know bought his Oris specifically because there was no story attached to it, just a warranty card and a case that will outlive him. He services it every 5 years, wears it into the ocean without a second thought, and has never once been asked what it cost. This overpay ranking starts with a company that forgot to overpay you, and honestly, that's a strange place to begin a countdown like this one. Most brands spend money convincing you the number is fair. Oris just quotes the number and walks away. Oris earned its spot by staying boring. The next name earns its spot by being almost invisible. 21. Frédéric Constant. Frédéric Constant put an actual in-house movement into a watch, priced like something from a mall kiosk. The husband and wife founders built the company on a simple promise: real Swiss manufacture at a price point normally reserved for parts shipped in from a third-party supplier and marked up twice before they reach the case. The peripheral rotor caliber, developed and assembled in-house rather than bought off a shelf, sits inside pieces running roughly $1,300 to $2,500. Compare that to a fashion label charging similar money for a quartz movement costing under $50 to produce. And the gap between those two watches, sitting at the same price on the same shelf, becomes the whole story of this list in miniature. A first-time buyer standing between a Frédéric Constant manufacture piece and a fashion brand quartz watch at the same price point, both sitting in the same glass case at the same department store, isn't choosing between two similar options wearing different logos. They're choosing between an actual mechanism built by people who understand it and a commodity part with a name license stitched on top of it. That's not a marginal difference. It's the difference this entire ranking exists to explain, item by item, all the way to the bottom. Frédéric Constant will never trend online. It just keeps building the same honest movement, year after year, for people who bothered to check. If Frédéric Constant is honest pricing done quietly, wait until you see what $200 gets you 3 names from now. 20. Tissot. What does $200 actually buy you in a watch? At Tissot, it buys a Powermatic 80 movement with an 80-hour power reserve, built on Swatch Group's shared engineering across multiple sister brands, sold at a markup that barely covers distribution and marketing. Tissot isn't trying to be prestigious. It's trying to be honest at scale, leaning on group-level movement sourcing to keep costs down without cutting corners on what actually keeps time inside the case. You will not see a Tissot on a red carpet. You will see one on the wrist of someone who did the math, quietly, and moved on with their day. Tissot isn't chasing anyone's attention, and that's precisely why it doesn't need to inflate the number to earn yours. Tissot plays it straight because the group behind it can afford to. The next name has been playing it straight since 1866. 19. Longines. In Saint-Imier, the same building has made Longines watches since 1866. The Spirit and Hydro Conquest lines run on ETA-adjacent movements refined enough to earn chronometer certification, priced modestly against that Olympic timing pedigree. Longines built the official timing equipment for the Olympic Games for decades and still barely markets the fact today. Analysts tracking the secondary market increasingly point to Longines as the name quietly taking over the smart buy reputation. Another brand on this very list used to hold, back before that brand's own resale numbers started slipping under it. Nobody buys a Longines to flex at a party. They buy it because the numbers actually work, and because the company seems mildly embarrassed by the idea of charging you for a story it never bothered writing down in the first place. A watchmaker with 160 years of receipts to point to could easily charge for the history alone. Longines mostly declines to. Longines is the value pick nobody brags about. Baume & Mercier takes that same idea and turns the volume down even further. 18. Baume & Mercier. Nobody buys a Baume & Mercier to impress a stranger at dinner. Richemont owns the name and keeps it priced modestly against the group's flashier siblings like Cartier and IWC, which means the markup stays honest because there's no incentive to inflate it past what the tier can reasonably bear. It's the answer to a question almost nobody asks out loud. What does a truly competent, unglamorous Swiss watch actually cost to make and sell at a fair margin, once you strip out the story? Turns out the answer is smaller than the industry generally wants you to believe, and Baume & Mercier seems oddly content to let that stay quiet. It's the kind of company that would rather sell you a fair watch than argue with you about why it deserves more of your money. That question gets a very different answer at the next name on the list, because the next name shouldn't work as a value pick at all, and somehow it does anyway. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. 17. Rolex. Rolex should be the villain of this list. It isn't. Steel sports references like the Daytona and GMT Master resell far above their own suggested retail price, in some documented cases well over double, which means the overpay at the counter isn't really an overpay at all. It's closer to a deposit you get back with interest, assuming you can even get one at retail in the first place without a years-long relationship with a dealer. Serious collectors keep a private hierarchy about which names actually hold value once you walk out the door. A list passed around forums and dealer counters more than it's ever printed anywhere official, and Rolex sits at the very top of it, alongside a couple of names still to come on this countdown. The definition of overpaying assumes you can't get your money back. Rolex quietly removed that assumption from the conversation decades ago, and the rest of the industry has been reacting to that single fact ever since, whether the marketing departments admit it or not. Even the most common references, the ones with no waitlist drama attached, tend to sell secondhand at or near their original sticker price years after purchase, which is not something you can say about almost any other consumer product on Earth, watch or otherwise. Which watch have you actually owned the longest? Rolex broke the rules of this list by being too good at resale. The next name breaks them by being misunderstood instead. 16. Grand Seiko. Grand Seiko costs too much for what it is. That's the popular opinion online. And it's wrong. Zaratsu polishing takes years to learn and still can't be automated by any machine currently in production. The spring drive movement runs accurate to roughly 1 second a day without a battery anywhere in the case. And the dials are cut to mimic snowfall and rice paddies by hand in small workshops in Shizukuishi and Shinshu. The finishing on a $5,000 Grand Seiko Rivals work found on watches costing 4 times as much from far more famous Swiss addresses. Here's what people miss when they complain about the price online. They're comparing name recognition, not the object actually sitting in front of them. Put the case under a loupe for 30 seconds, and the complaint mostly evaporates on its own. A retired jeweler once told me he could tell a Grand Seiko dial from across a room by the way the light broke across the surface, before he ever saw the logo. That's not branding. That's just craftsmanship doing the talking on its own. If Grand Seiko is underrated because nobody looks closely enough, the next name is underrated because almost nobody looks at all. 15. Zenith. 36,000 vibrations an hour, and almost nobody in the room could tell you why that number matters. It's the frequency of the El Primero chronograph movement, one of the fastest beating mechanical calibers ever put into serial production, first released in 1969 in an actual three-way race between competing manufacturers to build the world's first automatic chronograph. It still prices well under equivalent complications from the more famous Geneva houses just down the street. Zenith built real high-frequency engineering that still sets the standard chronograph racers chase today, and somehow never got full credit for it outside a fairly small circle of enthusiasts who already knew to look. Put the El Primero next to a chronograph twice its price, and the difference under the loop is smaller than the difference in the marketing budgets. Zenith is underpriced by accident of marketing. The next name is underpriced because almost nobody knows to look in the first place. 14. Girard-Perregaux. Everybody assumes serious haute horlogerie starts at 6 figures. Girard-Perregaux is the exception nobody mentions at the dinner party. The Laureato line and the brand's constant escapement research, an actual attempt to solve one of watchmaking's oldest accuracy problems, sit on real in-house architecture priced well below what the same complexity would cost from a more recognizable name across town. This is the honest craft on this list, hidden mostly by a marketing budget too quiet for its own good. Put a Girard-Perregaux next to a far pricier rival from a more famous address, and the finishing holds its own without apology. Girard-Perregaux hides in plain sight. So does the next name, but for a truly stranger reason. 13. Ulysse Nardin. Ulysse Nardin builds some of the strangest, most technically ambitious movements in Switzerland, and the market still prices the company like a mid-tier sport watch label. Silicium components resist magnetism far better than traditional steel ever could. The Freak collection's entire movement rotates as the display itself with no hands or dial in the usual sense, and a marine chronometer pedigree stretches back to the age of sail, when the company's instruments were trusted aboard 50 different navies around the world. None of that mythology has translated into the pricing power it probably deserves, which is unusual in an industry where far thinner stories routinely command far thicker premiums from buyers who never ask why. Ulysse Nardin keeps building strange, ambitious things and keeps pricing them like nobody's watching. Somebody should be. So far, this list has been kind. That changes now, because the value quietly starts running out from here. 12. Tudor. Tudor calls itself the value alternative to Rolex. Run the actual numbers, and the story gets complicated fast. Tudor's in-house Kinesi movements power the Black Bay at roughly $4,000, against a Submariner starting north of $9,000, so on paper, the value case looks airtight. But resale tells a different story entirely. Tudor sells at or below its own retail price on the secondary market, with none of the premium Rolex commands once a watch leaves the store and starts its second life. Tudor isn't the smart buy anymore. It's just the familiar one. I've watched buyers choose a Black Bay specifically because they couldn't get their name onto a Submariner waitlist, not because they actually wanted a Tudor sitting on their wrist for the next decade. Tudor's own marketing still sells the brand as the affordable stand-in for its parent company. But the resale numbers say it isn't being bought as a substitute anymore. It's being bought on its own terms now, at a price that used to feel like a bargain and increasingly just feels like a price on a tag. None of this makes Tudor a bad watch. The movements are sound, the finishing is honest, and the Pelagos in titanium is a serious tool watch built for real diving rather than a display case, rated for real depth, and built to actually take a beating rather than sit under glass. The overpay risk here isn't in the object, it's in the expectation that came bundled with the name next to it on the dial. Buy it for what it is, not for what it used to stand in for, and the math holds up fine on its own. Tudor lost its title as the value king to a couple of names earlier on this list. The next name lost something bigger: the benefit of the doubt. 11. Omega. Omega used to be the watch people bought instead of a Rolex when the waitlist got too long or the price felt like too much to justify. Retail prices climbed hard enough over the past several years that the sentence quietly stopped being true for a large slice of buyers watching both price lists at once. The coaxial escapement is truly clever engineering, reducing friction in a way that extends service intervals well beyond older designs, and master chronometer certification means real anti-magnetic testing up to 15,000 Gauss, a standard well beyond typical Swiss chronometer requirements. None of that changes the uncomfortable facts sitting underneath it. The price gap with Rolex has narrowed considerably, without Omega gaining any of Rolex's resale strength to match the new number on the tag. Buy a Seamaster today, and you're paying Rolex-adjacent money for a watch that still resells like the Rolex alternative it used to be, which is a strange spot for any company to find itself standing in. Omega's problem is a name catching up to a price it can't quite justify yet. The next name has the opposite problem, a story that's been justifying its price for 150 years. 10. IWC. IWC's Portugueser costs what it costs because of a name and a story attached to a movement, not really the other way around. The in-house calibers are well engineered, built in Schaffhausen with a level of finishing that holds up under a loupe without much complaint, a small town that has been quietly perfecting the same craft since 1868, long before anyone thought to turn it into a marketing department. But ask any owner what they're actually paying for, and the story about Portuguese sailors financing a pocket watch conversion into a wristwatch back in the 1930s comes up before the movement itself, almost every single time you ask. That's not a coincidence. That's the sales pitch working exactly as it was designed to. The movement earns its keep. The story earns the rest of the invoice. IWC sells you a story with real engineering underneath it. The next name sells you a story with a jewelry counter underneath it instead. 9. Chopard. Chopard makes some of its own movements, under the LUC label, and almost none of that shows up in why people actually buy the company at the counter. Chopard started life as a jewelry house before it was ever a watchmaker, and most of its watch volume today, the Happy Diamonds line especially, sells on the strength of the loose diamonds rattling behind the crystal, not the caliber ticking underneath them in silence. The jewelry premium quietly absorbs whatever the movement was actually worth on its own, and almost nobody buying the watch stops to separate the two numbers before paying for both at once, together, as if they were the same thing. Ask a jeweler to price the stones alone sometime. The gap between that number and the sticker price is where the watchmaking argument quietly goes to die. Chopard hides a jewelry markup inside a watch case. The next name hides a pen company inside a watch case, and that is not a joke. 8. Montblanc. Montblanc's watch division exists because a pen company bought a historic movement workshop, Minerva, and needed somewhere respectable to put it. Most of the actual catalog runs on ETA or Sellita bases underneath, dressed in a case that borrows credibility from 100 years of fountain pens sitting in breast pockets around the world, signing contracts nobody remembers today. Here's the quiet detail that gets buried in all of this noise. Minerva's hand-finished chronograph movements really are excellent, some of the best hand-finishing left standing in the entire industry. They simply aren't what's ticking inside the watch. Most people are actually buying off the shelf at the boutique. Ask for the Minerva movement specifically, and the price jumps sharply, which tells you everything about which parts of the catalog are actually earning their keep. Montblanc borrows credibility from pens. The next name borrows a cockpit instrument panel, screws and all. 7. Bell & Ross. Bell & Ross sells roughly the same square instrument panel case in dozens of configurations a year, and every single one gets marketed like a brand new watch, arriving fresh off the drawing board. Most run on ETA or Sellita movements underneath the aviation styling, borrowed from cockpit dashboards and submarine depth gauges from decades past. You're paying for the design license on a shape, repeated season after season, far more than you're paying for anything mechanically new actually happening inside the case itself. Change the dial color, change the strap, call it a limited edition, and the same movement quietly does the same job it did the year before. Bell & Ross charges for a shape. The next name charges for the fact that everyone on the planet already recognizes the shape on sight. 6. Cartier. Cartier is the second highest grossing watch name on Earth. ranked there by Morgan Stanley's own industry data. And most of that revenue has surprisingly little to do with watchmaking in the traditional sense. The Santos runs about $7,000 on average, and the in-house 1847MC caliber inside it is a legitimate manufacture movement, not a rebadged commodity part quietly borrowed from a supplier down the road. So the engineering case is real, and worth saying plainly before anything else. But collectors on their own forums have quietly admitted something telling about the purchase itself. Many buy the Santos already expecting it to lose money, and buy it anyway, because the watch is beautiful, rather than because it's a smart financial decision on paper. Cartier makes more money selling watches than almost anyone else alive, and most of the people buying from it still don't think of the company as a watch company first, if at all. That confusion isn't an accident of branding left to chance. It's the business model itself, working exactly as intended, quarter after quarter, year after year. Honestly, I keep going back and forth on whether that makes Cartier the most honest name on this list or simply the most effective marketing operation sitting on it. Ask 100 Santos owners why they bought the watch, and maybe 5 will mention the movement unprompted. The other 95 will talk about the square case, the exposed screws, the century of Roman numerals on Hollywood wrists. Cartier sells jewelry that happens to tell time, and it has never once pretended otherwise to anyone paying close attention. The company has been doing this since 1847, long enough that the pretending stopped being necessary generations ago. Cartier at least gives you a real movement underneath the name tax. The next name gives you a marketing budget instead. 5. Breitling. Breitling spent decades sponsoring air shows and signing celebrity ambassadors, and the marketing line item shows up on the price tag before the movement ever does. The in-house B1 chronograph caliber is well built where it actually gets used across the catalog. No argument there. But average pricing across the wider lineup reflects the ambassador contracts and the aviation halo far more than it reflects what's actually ticking underneath the dial in most references sold at retail today. Somewhere in every Breitling invoice is a line item for a stunt pilot's contract that has nothing to do with your wrist. Breitling sells you the sponsorship deal. The next name sold you an entire myth about Italian frogmen for 20 straight years. 4. Panerai. Panerai sold Italian Navy frogman mythology for 2 decades before most of its catalog ran on anything more than an off-the-shelf movement borrowed from elsewhere. For years, the core criticism from serious collectors was simple and consistent. Unmodified entry-level calibers, inside cases priced like haute horologerie, at 44 to 47 millimeters that didn't comfortably fit half the wrists actually buying them at the counter. The earliest pre-Vendome Radiomir cases really are gorgeous, some of the most collectible tool watches of the 20th century, built for actual combat divers rather than a showroom. That's what makes the marketing that followed so hard to stomach in hindsight, because the company had a real story available and chose to inflate it anyway. Panerai has answered some of the movement criticism with genuine in-house calibers over the past decade. It hasn't fully answered the resale math yet. Standard modern Panerai references hold on to roughly 60 to 80% of their retail price once they hit the secondary market and settle, a gap that shows up the moment the box gets opened for the first time. There's a reason longtime Panerai owners get quiet when you ask what the watch is actually worth today. It isn't embarrassment. It's arithmetic. And arithmetic doesn't care how good the Navy story sounds at a dinner party. Ask one what he paid, and the number comes fast. Ask what it's worth now, and the answer arrives a beat slower, like he's doing the subtraction in his head for the first time in years. The case is still enormous on his wrist. The story that justified the size just got quieter. Panerai's mythology cost you 20 to 40% at resale. The next name's mythology cost $16,000 for a movement it didn't even build itself. 3. Hublot. Hublot charged $16,000 for a steel watch built around a barely modified ETA movement and called the whole approach the art of fusion with a completely straight face. The Big Bang's HUB 4100 caliber, for years, was essentially an ETA 2894-2 base, with a chronograph module bolted on top, a fact printed nowhere on the dial and rarely volunteered at the counter by anyone selling it. The Unico in-house movement finally arrived in 2010 specifically to answer that complaint, And Hublot's own CEO has since admitted, on the record and in public, that the company spent years earning the criticism aimed at it fair and square. Here's the strange part nobody really expected going in. Hublot didn't just get criticized for using someone else's movement and move on quietly into the next collection. The complaints got loud enough that they helped push the entire luxury watch industry toward building in-house calibers as a competitive necessity, because outsourcing at that price point had suddenly become a liability everywhere, not just at Hublot's boutiques. The company that caused the loudest complaint accidentally set the new rule. Every other name on this list now has to follow, whether it wanted to or not. There's something almost admirable in that, even if the admiration comes with a wince attached. Hublot took the criticism personally enough to spend a decade and real engineering money fixing it, which is more than several other names on this list have bothered to do. Say what you want about the rubber straps and the diamond-encrusted limited runs. At least the movement underneath them today is finally the company's own. Hublot at least eventually built something real to answer for itself. The next two names never bothered doing the same. 2. Invicta. Invicta lists a watch at $4,000 and sells it for $300, and both of those numbers are fiction from the start, printed for entirely different reasons. The suggested retail prices, often running from $3,995 to $5,995, exist for exactly one reason: to make a 75 to 90% discount look like a genuine deal instead of what it actually is, which is simply the real price all along. Inside sits a Seiko NH35 or a Miyota caliber, movements that cost a small fraction of either number printed on the tag hanging off the strap. Invicta was a real Swiss watchmaker once, founded in 1837 by Raphael Picard. Since an American buyout in 1991, most production has shifted to Asia, and the Swiss heritage on the box became a label rather than a description of anything actually happening inside the case. Remember when this list said to hold on to the phrase "suggested retail" a few names back? This is why. Invicta didn't invent the fake discount playbook. It just industrialized it at a scale nobody else had bothered attempting before. The watch itself usually isn't the scam here, and it's worth saying that plainly. Cheap and cheerful is a legitimate category, and plenty of Invicta buyers know exactly what they're getting for their money. The price tag stapled on top of the watch is the scam, not the object underneath it. Walk through the comments under any Invicta unboxing video, and you'll find the same sentence typed 1,000 different ways. I know it's not really worth $4,000, but look how much watch I got for $80. That sentence is the entire business model, typed out in public by the very people it worked on. Nobody forced them to type it. The marketing did its job so quietly, they thought the conclusion was their own idea. Invicta fakes a discount on a truly real watch. Number 1 doesn't even need to fake the watch part anymore. 1. Michael Kors and the Fashion House tier. A Michael Kors watch costs somewhere between $45 and $60 to build, in China, on a quartz movement, and sells for up to 15 times that number at full retail. Fossil Group manufactures it under a license extending through 2027 on largely the same production lines that build Fossil-branded pieces selling for a fraction of the price under a completely different logo stamped on the dial face. The steel runs thin. Owners report gold tone plating fading within a year of normal wear, and stones falling out of watch faces well inside the warranty period, according to repair complaints logged across multiple review sites over the past several years. Somewhere, a graduation gift bought new in 2019 sits in a resale group today, listed for $8. No offers yet. The photo taken on a kitchen counter under bad lighting. The daughter who received it never learned what the logo actually cost to produce. She just knew it felt like an occasion at the time, and that feeling, not the movement, quietly ticking inside the case, was the entire product being sold to her that day. 21 names on this list charged you for something real, even on the occasions when they charged you far too much for it. This one charged you for a name stamped onto a part that costs less than a dinner out with friends, and called the difference a watch. Nobody at the company had to fabricate anything to make that work. They just had to stay quiet and let the logo do what logos are built to do. Somewhere between the factory in Guangdong and the display case in the mall, a $50 part earned itself a $1,000 biography, and almost nobody along the way had to lie to make that happen. The price tag did all the talking by itself. That's the quietest kind of markup on this entire list, and possibly the most effective one, because nobody involved ever had to say a false word out loud to make it work. Now, tell me, what do you think of this list? Did I miss anything? Let me know in the comments and I will see you in the next one. Also, hit that subscribe button to support us and like this video to help it go viral.